If you've ever looked into pagan rituals, folk religion, or modern witchcraft, you've probably noticed something really strange. Salt is like everywhere. Salt circles, salt for cleansing, salt for protection, and then you open the Bible and salt is there too. But that raises a question most people never really slow down enough to think about and ask. Why does the same element keep showing up in completely different belief systems? And does it actually mean the same thing? And the answer to this isn't mystical, it's actually biblical. Just to say this clearly up front, salt itself is not evil, it's not magical or powerful on its own. The Bible never treats created things that way. What matters is who defines its meaning, and scripture actually gives salt a meaning long before paganism ever does. So let's start where the Bible starts assigning meaning to salt, not just with Jesus, but actually all the way back in Leviticus. In Leviticus 2:13, God says, "You shall season all your grain offerings with salt, the salt of the covenant of your God." That phrase, salt of the covenant, is doing a lot of work, and that's where people usually miss something really important. In the ancient world, salt represented permanence, preservation, and faithfulness. It made something endure. So in Leviticus, salt isn't a symbolic decoration, it's a covenant marker. Every sacrifice had to include salt because the offering wasn't about manipulating God, it was about faithful relationship. Salt didn't create holiness, it preserved what God declared holy. And without salt, the offering was incomplete. And here's where people usually start getting uncomfortable. Because when you look into pagan religions, ancient or modern, salt shows up again. But the meaning actually shifts. In pagan systems, salt is treated as something that works on its own. It cleanses, protects, blocks, it neutralizes. So then the authority kind of moved from God to covenant to human to ritual to object. And that really makes a difference. This is a pattern scripture explains over and over again. Pagan systems rarely invent new elements, they just detach created things from God and then assign power to the thing itself. In modern witchcraft, salt is used to draw boundaries or cleansing energy. In Leviticus, though, salt never functions independently like that. It only has meaning within the covenant obedience. Same element, but completely different sources of authority. And this is why Jesus' teaching about salt would have landed very differently to his original audience than it does to us. Jesus tells the parable about salt and light. He says, "You're the salt of the earth, but if anything loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again?" So people think, oh, but salt can't lose its flavor. How can it not be salty anymore? And that's true. Pure salt really can't lose its flavor. But Jesus isn't speaking hypothetically or metaphorically here. And this is again what people usually miss. The salt commonly used in Jesus' day, especially around the Dead Sea, it was often mixed with other minerals. Over time, this Dead Sea salt, it could dissolve or leach out, leaving behind like this chalky residue that it looked like salt, but it actually had no preserving or purifying power. That kind of salt, it couldn't preserve, it couldn't purify, it couldn't be used in sacrifice, and it was basically just thrown out and trampled, just like Jesus said. Everybody listening to Jesus knew this, but this is something we miss in modern day times. So this isn't just about flavor, and this is where Jesus' warning gets really serious. He's not talking about personality or influence or being impressive. He's talking about mixture. Something that looks covenantal, but no longer functions as covenant salt. He's talking about false salt. And this true salt versus false salt concept, it ties all the way back to Leviticus. In Leviticus, covenant salt didn't lose its purpose because it wasn't mixed with anything else. It preserved holiness, it purified, it sanctified the offering. But impure salt or mixed salt, it lost its usefulness. That's Jesus' warning. Not about struggling believers, but about covenant faithfulness being replaced with compromise. This is why the use of salt in witchcraft is ultimately false. Not because salt itself is bad, but because its meaning is detached from its original covenant. Witchcraft treats salt as powerful by technique and the element itself. Scripture treats salt as meaningful by obedience and relationship. Same element, opposite authority. So when Jesus says you're the salt of the earth, he's saying You're meant to preserve covenant faithfulness in a world that constantly mixes truth with distortion. Salt didn't invent purity, it maintains what God already declared holy, and compromised salt can't purify anything. We being the salt, we're supposed to go out there and purify what is adulterated. That's the true meaning of salt in a biblical sense. So yes, salt does appear in scripture, paganism, and witchcraft, but the connection is not mystical and the connection is not really what you think. Created things show up everywhere, but scripture alone defines their meaning through covenant. Paganism doesn't reveal any hidden truths, it just distorts what God already established. And Jesus doesn't borrow from pagan symbolism either. He restores biblical meaning.